Welcome to another episode of I Catch Killers. Today's guest is a good friend of mine, well-known Australian actress Madeleine West. We met several years ago when she invited me onto a podcast called Invisible Heroes. After we became friends, she contacted me seeking advice regarding a very sensitive subject. When she was a young girl, she was sexually assaulted by a paedophile, and she wanted to get justice. Very bravely, she decided to make the sexual predator who stole her childhood accountable. She went to the police, reported the crime, and courageously assisted investigators to gather evidence against the offender, who is now in jail where he belongs. Madeleine's story to get justice is inspirational. Empowered by her strength and resilience, we teamed up to do an 8-part podcast series called Predatory, where we put the spotlight on this very dark subject. Today on I Catch Killers, we're going to discuss Madeleine's fascinating life and show how she turned the tables on the disgusting man who stole her childhood. This man has now been sentenced to 15 years imprisonment with a non-parole period of 9 years. The I Catch Killers podcast was a fresh start for me, as I left policing behind and started a new life. Over the years, we've laughed together, cried, and shared some powerful moments. Welcome to I Catch Killers. Madeleine West, welcome to I Catch Killers.
Thanks, Gary.
Well, it's good to see you smiling because you've, and laughing, but you've certainly been through a bit in the last couple of years.
Through the ringer?
Yeah.
Might be
I think that's a fair way of describing it. How do you feel after it? And we're talking about, so if people don't know the story, what we're going to be talking about today is Madeleine came forward a couple of years ago as a victim of childhood sexual assault. And it's been a traumatic period for you for the last couple of years. Mm-hmm. Going to the police, being involved in the investigation, the court proceedings, and that was finalised in December 2023. We've become good friends over the years, and I know how much stress it placed on you. Do you feel like a burden's been lifted from your shoulders now that you've got justice, whatever form justice can be, because you can't take the years that were stolen away from you back? Do you feel a little bit lighter?
That's an understatement, Gary.
Yeah.
I honestly feel, and I said this in my victim impact statement, I honestly feel I have dropped that backpack, that cross of shame that I carried my entire life, to the point that shame was, ashamed is a way I would describe myself. If I could put it in my CV, I would. I've lived my life feeling I had something to hide, that there was something about me that wasn't right, that I wasn't good enough.
Yeah.
I've dropped that and I've kicked it into the cell with him, and it can rot with him for all eternity, for all I care. I've given it back to where it belongs.
Yeah.
So I honestly feel like a different person. I feel reborn, reincarnated, completely different.
Yeah, because when you first spoke to me and you contacted me and you told me the situation and you were looking for some advice from my policing days on what the processes would be, you were obviously nervous about what was being asked of you.
I was absolutely terrified, and as much as I felt very comfortable with. Comfortable is the wrong word. I'd survived. I'd tolerated what had been necessary to get the case to that particular point. I didn't know that I could trust the system.
Yeah.
I didn't know that I could trust the system because I'd seen the justice system fail people time and again, time and again, time and again. And I first met you when I interviewed you for my first podcast series, Invisible
I remember
Heroes,
that. Yep.
and followed you around a little bit out at Coffs because you were doing some work on a doco on Bowraville.
Bowraville, that's right.
And your I Catch Killers had just come out.
Everything
Great
was
read.
happening.
Everything was happening.
I'd just been charged.
You'd just been charged. Oh, my God.
Yeah, so
Look at
much
that
going on.
snapshot from history. But you demonstrated to me what policing could be. Now, I don't know whether New South Wales Police would agree, but you, to me, your actions around the William Tyrrell investigation was what every parent would hope a police officer does. Yeah. Go above and beyond and follow your instincts. That's what you'd hope for. I went, geez, there are officers with integrity.
Yeah.
But I needed someone who could give me an honest blow-by-blow that was not directly weighted by the case.
Yeah, yeah.
Because we always colour our advice with the outcome that we want to achieve. And I understood that we want to get this guy behind bars. But I'm a human, a flesh and bone person over here, and I'm quietly dying from fear and trauma.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, trying to navigate everyday life, I just need someone with the balls to tell me how it's going to be.
Well, that's where I felt comfortable in that I could, because I was separated from it, I could tell you, well, these are the options, these are the processes. So, yeah, I think when you reached out to me, I was hoping you'd go down the path, but I think I left the options up to you, just laid it all out on the table, and this is what you can choose to do. And clearly you made the right choice.
Absolutely.
Because there's some scumbag in jail now.
Yeah, and it's not everyone's choice. Not everyone would be available to do
exactly,
what I
and
did.
not each case would lend itself to that type of thing. So,
but right place, right time.
Yeah.
We got the right outcome.
And it's a hard thing, isn't it? Because it's virtually opening up old wounds for you. And
absolutely. And beyond that, it has a name. It's called the emergency phase.
Yep.
It's where the memories have started to resurface to the point where the white noise around them is unavoidable. It's all you can think about, and it's all you see everywhere you look.
Yeah.
Sexual abuse, that must be sexual abuse. You suspect it everywhere. You smell it everywhere. Everything you do and think about is in some way permeated by the issue. And the next step is where you go into emergency phase. You're in full fight, flight, or flee. And that was where I was when I contacted you.
Yeah.
I had all the memories coming up a mile a minute. I knew that I'd been working with the police for a couple of years, and now I had agreed to further the investigation.
Take the next step. Yep.
And that was when I reached out to you for advice. I'm amazed I was able to function enough just to make a phone call, let alone take care of myself, because it's so overwhelming. And you have very little support because, as we've covered in the Predatory podcast, no one wants to talk about this. And you've grown up being told that this is your fault. You've grown up surrounded by a conspiracy of silence, which is, well, that never happened, or just pretend it didn't happen. Let's just sweep it under the rug. And finally, you're facing off with it. And the consequences are enormous.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can't imagine unless you've walked that path, you don't really understand. But, just coping, surviving. On the exterior, you're successful in every sort of aspect. You're the mother of 6 children. I've got to speak to you about that. How you manage all the other stuff you do. You're one of the most well-known Australian actresses. You've been now, in light of what's happened with the court matter, an advocate for childhood sexual abuse, and you're doing a lot of speaking there. You're certainly busy. You're an author. There's so many things that you're doing. Was that masking some of the pain that you were dealing with internally?
It was all, so much of it was a carefully constructed facade that I had designed to escape Melanie.
Melanie being the childhood.
Yeah, I changed my name when I was very young, precisely to escape her, to change everything about her, and ran headlong into the profession of acting, which I love, and I love being an actor. But it's undeniable that a component of that was it allowed me to disappear into someone else, to wear someone else's skin for a little while, because living in my own was simply intolerable. And I know outwardly I have achieved many, many things, and I'm very proud of what I've managed to achieve. But I also know that I have lived with a crushing perfectionism that translated into my work, my relationships, even how I saw myself, and led to shocking eating disorders and walking around in skin that felt like it was made of razor blades because it was just so uncomfortable being me. So I'm very, very grateful for the successes I've achieved. But on reflection and having the opportunity to write my victim's impact statement and deliver it in court to Peter White, to his face, allowed me to see, ostensibly Gary gave me a blueprint for who I am and why I am, that so many elements of my life lead back to those formative years, that it's a miracle that I've managed to get as far as I have. It's a miracle that anyone who is a victim or a survivor manages to get on with life, and many can't. And I think I would just beg, if as a society we can practice a bit more empathy and understanding where people come from. We saw it in the podcast.
We definitely saw it in Predatory. That opened my eyes up to so many things.
Absolutely. And so many criminals in the justice system have come from that
trauma,
background.
Being a victim of childhood sexual abuse, the ongoing effects. Let's just briefly, and I want to talk about the victim's impact statement, but the judge's commenting re-sentencing of Peter Vincent White. So this is this dirty, rotten, convicted pedophile who's now in jail where he should be. There were 33 charges all up. 10 of those charges were against you, and there were 6 other victims in the matters in which he pleaded guilty to.
Yes.
It's frightening, isn't it?
Well, there was more than 6, Gary.
Yeah.
That's 6, 7, including myself, who had the wherewithal to get up and across years make statements and recall fully in minute detail the most shameful, horrific events of their life, and to deal with the renewed trauma that comes from that. That you're going in and spending 3, 4, 5 hours with a sergeant or a detective talking about matters that most of us don't even want to comprehend is possible, let alone living through. And then going back to make the kids' school lunches, or going back to the office, or going back to a relationship. So it was only that we had the wherewithal to do it. There was a lot who didn't, and I understand why they didn't. Yeah. And that is the most common scenario, that victims simply will not say anything. They'll just let it go. So I feel really honoured to have stood alongside those 6 people. Yeah. And we have created a community where, for the first time in our lives, we know someone who understands what it's like to be us.
I was going to say that. I would imagine, I was reading the judge's comments and going through the trauma that all the victims suffered and the offences, the judge's comments on sentencing. But it must be good to realise that there are other people that have gone through what you've gone through, that the feelings that you've felt are not just particular to you. They're
and
across the board.
Because that's one of the most dastardly things in this crime, because it is veiled by so much secrecy. You don't have a point of reference. You think it's only you, that only you could be going through this, and only you is bad enough and dirty enough to deserve this, that you must be somehow broken. We spent a lot of time when we all first met just going, you do that too? I do that too. Just that kind of recognition of a verisimilitude of experience, of a similarity of experience. That in itself is deeply healing, to know you're not the only one.
Yeah, I could imagine, and just reading the judge's comments taken from the victims' impact statements, and people, I assume people know what victims' impact statements are. It's for certain type of offences where the victim gets the right to actually say how this crime has impacted on them. It was brought into New South Wales in murder cases and other cases. And I think it's good. It's bringing some humanity to the court.
And
so
it has, I'll make this point, that it actually impacts sentencing, that what you say has a direct impact on the sentence that criminal, that monster, will receive. So it's so important. It's healing, but it also has a procedural purpose. Purpose
to it.
And I wish for every victim or survivor out there, they have an opportunity, whether it's at court or whether it's in a therapeutic scenario, to create a victim impact statement, to say the words, "This happened to me, and it wasn't my fault."
Yeah. And look, just to give an idea of what the judge took away from your comments. This is a statement, I'll just read it out. Miss West reflects on the insidious impact your offending has had on many aspects of her life, physically, emotionally and psychologically. She says you robbed her of her precious formative years as a child, a time that she should have been special. Instead, you violated her repeatedly. She struggled to form relationships because she could not feel safe with others or learn to trust them. That's a horrible burden to have to carry, Madeleine, and that's what the judge took from parts of your victim impact statement.
And you know, Gary, I didn't realise until I was writing that victim impact statement that I did not know what love looked like. That my notions of love was aggression or domination or being subjugated. And if I felt trust or comfort, I would routinely run away from it.
Yeah.
And more so, I couldn't empathise with where someone else was coming from, because the single most important relationship in my life, for my entire life, has been my trauma.
Yeah.
It has permeated every aspect of me, and hence it has always been number one. My trauma has to have its service. I will call trauma to me. I will trauma bond with other people who've been traumatised, rather than trusting my instincts and trusting that I'll be taken care of and trusting that I can take care of someone. And in that sense, I've actually been going around and one by one apologising to a lot of people who have played an important part in my life, not for what happened to me, but to give them clarity of the impact of what happened to me, to say, don't stop doing you. The fact that I ran away from you had nothing to do with you. It was me going, I don't understand why you care about me.
Yeah.
I don't understand why you love me. This is wrong. This isn't what love is. Love should be me feeling in pain and angry and upset. And that's impacted also the father of my children and my children who, that's my greatest regret, that they were dealing and have grown up with and was walking alongside a deeply traumatised woman who at the time did not even have the language to express what I was going through because the memories were coming up and my brain did not want to see it. It had protected me from it my whole life. It had been veil after veil, brick wall after brick wall. Those edifices were crumbling around me.
It sets up a blueprint to make your life just a ticking time bomb, doesn't it? You're just
And so
blowing
I
up
had
anything
people
that's good.
dealing with a woman who did not know what demons she was dealing with.
Yeah.
So it's just a moot point that I think that the more recognition we have about how victims play out their trauma for the rest of their life, this notion of sweeping it under the rug is a fallacy. It will manifest.
Yeah.
No matter what you do, no matter how fast and far you run like I did, it's going to come back to get you.
Catches you eventually.
And my poor kids have grown up with a traumatised mother. Their father was dealing with a traumatised woman.
Yeah.
And without the proper language and the tools to deal with that, which I now have, normal relationships are impossible.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to a bright future, Gary.
Okay, well, that's a turning point. Life's smooth sailing from here, hopefully. Before we talk about the trauma that you've touched on there, let's just talk a little bit about your life. So you grew up in country Victoria, but
Woodend.
you, and if this information's correct, you moved around a lot at schools. You 8 different schools between primary and high schools.
Yeah,
but I will say that's a lot.
It is a lot, and it taught me adaptability, and it taught me, on reflection, though, I will say that it enabled me to never connect too deeply.
Yeah.
It taught me to keep relationships transitory.
Okay.
I'm not going to be here long enough to really care about you. So we'll just have this great, fun, little short, sharp relationship, then I'll be out of here. Because I might be at a school for a couple of months or a year. But I've always loved learning. I've always loved education.
Yeah.
That's always been my safe place. And I left home quite early. And school, even while I was out of home, school became the place where I could be a child, where I could have an inquiring mind, where I could learn about the world and express myself freely.
Yeah.
And hence I have a very high regard for education and teachers. But I will say this, despite the fact that I've moved around a lot, Woodend was always home and had been for multiple generations on both sides of my family. Both my grandfather's names are on the clock tower, having fought in World War II.
That makes them a part of the country town.
And that bastard pushed me out of my town.
Yeah.
That town, my blood runs in that town.
Yeah.
Thick and fast. Lots of kids on both sides of the family. He pushed me out. And now I can return.
Yeah.
I can return home.
That makes sense.
Yes, I certainly did.
Well, I was when I was reading that, preparing for our sit down, the 8 different schools, it made me reflect on how many people I've had sitting here that have had a childhood where they've moved around a lot.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know, given the type of people we have on the I Catch Killers podcast, I don't know. But
Maybe killers.
let's just say the people that move around tend to have interesting lives, or their life gets interesting for some reason. Maybe there's something in that.
And I think often you look, it's the best way to kind of find yourself in the acting craft because you meld yourself to each new situation, which is an amazing ability, but it's also not necessarily healthy because you never fully evolve who you are. And I think that, as we know, some of the most colourful people on the planet are criminals.
Yes.
They're engaging, they're witty, they're often extremely erudite, very, very smart. I think a big part of that is they've learned to play the room from a young age
Yeah.
and moving around from school to school where you need to make a good impression really quick so you can get in with the right group.
Oh, if you
So you've
stuff
got
up
a
in the
support
playground
system.
first up, you're gone.
Exactly,
Yeah.
you're done.
Yeah.
That's a really important part of how they've progressed through their early years, and it could lead to a trajectory of
Yeah, it makes sense.
becoming the colourful criminal or the soap actor. I don't know. I'm not casting aspersions here.
Well, talking about acting, before you got into acting, you did enrol you were studying law at one stage.
I did. Well, I started acting when I was really, really young, Gary.
Yeah.
I started on stage.
Yep.
But funnily enough, aptly, I had a real passion for justice, and I got really good marks in high school, as I said earlier.
Yeah.
School was my safe place.
You
I
liked it?
love
Yep.
learning. I've always loved learning and had a very inquiring mind. So I got into law school, and I knew I wanted to act, but I didn't want to waste it, and I wanted to become a criminal lawyer in
Yeah.
the area of sex crimes against women and children.
Right, okay.
And
Do you think driven from your own
now we know
experiences?
why.
Yeah,
Absolutely. I've always wanted to be an advocate because I always knew that I'd been a victim
Yeah,
of pedophilia. I didn't know the gravity of it.
yeah,
Those fully formed memories are still coming out now. But for my entire life, there was just this sense of danger, this sense of an overriding, a fog, a mist, things that whole swathes of my childhood I did not remember at all.
yeah.
Nothing at all. Years that I knew I could not recall. I could look at family photos and go, I don't even really know who that person
See,
is.
that's the insidious part of these type of crimes, because in those formative years as a child, you want to be able to love and trust and feel comfortable, and the pedophiles tend to manipulate that.
Yeah.
They're rewarding kids or encouraging kids to trust them and creating this falseness around them so they can,
And that creates a lot of guilt for victims coming forward because they will say they were doing this, but
he give me
they
lollies.
also and it made me feel safe and I wanted to be around him.
Yeah.
And I don't like saying this, but bodies are biological beings that children can experience pleasure in that space, and that makes it even harder. But the fact is, a child can never consent to sexual relations with an adult.
That's a starting point.
They never play a
yeah.
role in it. But there's an awful lot of people walking around saying, well, they told me I liked it, and I did kind of like it, so it must be my fault.
And that's where it is so confusing for a child. And I remember you and Russell Manser sitting down and talking about that very thing, that what happened is so traumatic, but was it pleasurable? It was confusing. You're a kid, and this is happening to you. So that's where it, you say how it mucked you up.
Yeah.
When you break it down and strip it away, you can see why it just causes so much havoc in people's lives.
And absolute confusion, because you look back and the majority of survivors will say, I had a really good childhood.
Yeah.
Because your brain's gone, you're not seeing that bit. And then when you see that bit, that's all you can see. So it's such a black or white.
Yeah.
And learning to marry your life and accept that, well, that happened then, it's not happening now, because that's the beast that is trauma, that you're constantly in like dissociative states or fight or flight, that your body is wired, the amygdala is always switched on to say, I'm in danger the whole time. So you're up, you're high, you're amped the whole time.
Yeah.
That's no way to live a normal life when every choice you make is driven by fear.
Based on that,
Yeah.
you can see where it...
So until you learn to marry those worlds together and go, well, that happened then,
Yep.
but this is now. That was a child and I'm a grown-up.
And the way you're speaking now, is this something that if we wind the clock back 5 years ago, would you be as open or receptive to what you've been through, or were you
Not in
just
a minute.
still shutting it down?
Completely shut it down. And
Yep.
it transcended beyond just the topic of that. It was so insidious that, say, for example, if I was confronted with a situation,
Yeah.
I'd have an immediate response, and I was wired to go, that's the right thing to do,
Yep.
without stepping back from it, looking at it objectively, thinking about what the consequences, and just doing it.
Yep.
I was a highly reactive person. I'm now at a point now in my life where if I'm considering something or I'm confronted with something, there might be 3 or 4 different options or voices that will present themselves. One that, yes, the core instinct is still fear. Then there might be one that comes from anger. Then there might be an option that comes from a more sage wisdom perspective. And then there's one that comes from love.
Yeah.
Now, those other 3 were never available.
You-
Every choice was
you-
always driven by fear.
Right.
And I always thought that was the right choice to make.
And you just made that
snap judgment straight away. Now, it led to some great things sometimes.
Mm.
It also led to some really dark and dastardly things.
It's interesting you say that, and when you were talking about that, it made me think when I was under pressure in police, and I don't think I suffer post-traumatic stress, but when I was in a stressful situation, I knew that's how I changed, in that when I stepped back into the real world, not the police world, if I was asked a question, yes, we'll do that. It was just, you make the decision because that's the way you had to cope in that world.
And that's a reflection, Gary, that you probably do have some degree of PTSD.
Yeah.
That is there in you. And the best thing we can do is go, okay, that's wired me. It's given me some incredible executive functions. Like my executive brain can go,
you're on bang,
boom,
bang,
boom,
bang.
as opposed to going, which can be dangerous in itself.
Yeah.
But what comes with that is sometimes you're not objectively able to look at your environment.
Yeah.
You're not able to step back out of it and go, hang on a minute, but I care about that person, so why would I say that? Or, well, hang on a minute, that's not the result we need, so why would I do that? You're just following your instinct, and your instinct is like a wild animal.
But it served you well in a chaotic environment. I did a course, just a weekly course, and it was called Practical Psychology. Or Practical Philosophy, I should say. And what it was, one of the things I took away from it was you'd get homework each week and you'd have to work on an exercise or whatever. One of the things was, before you make a decision, just think, what would a wise person do? So before you make that decision, because we make 100 decisions a day.
Absolutely.
But before you make that decision, stop, check yourself, what would a wise person do? And I got back and, we're sitting around in the group talking about and what impact. And I said, I think I avoided about 10 different fights that week because you stop, you think, what would a wise person do? No, I don't have to say you're wrong, Madeleine. I could say, Madeleine, I understand what you're saying, but what if we consider,
absolutely,
different approach?
And it's nice to go, actually, that wise person is part of me now. That's in me. That capacity is there. It wasn't before. And it takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of rewiring and acceptance and letting go to that point. It takes a lot of meditation. It takes a lot of ocean swims and a lot of exercise and a lot of being willing to talk.
To get there.
Out. And I would encourage anyone, whether it's a big T trauma or a little T trauma in their life, to just say the words that this thing happened, to just drop the shame, drop the fear.
Well, I struggle with, and again, it's why I hate the nature of the crime, in that the victims carry shame with it. And I saw that too much in policing, all types of crimes, and people go, even if it's a robbery on the street, perhaps I shouldn't have walked down that street at that time of night. And there's always this victim blaming. They blame themselves. And then it's like it's on steroids when it's child sexual abuse. How did I let myself get into that position? You had no choice.
You had absolutely no agency at all whatsoever. And that's why we often see, and I've experienced it myself, where victims will go into dangerous behaviours in a desire for control. Whether it's, well, I'm going to starve myself because that person violated my body. I had no agency over it. So I can control my body by not feeding it. Or I'm going to drink myself into oblivion because that way I can control what I think about. Or I'm going to take drugs so I don't have to think about anything. Or I'm going to commit crimes because I'm not going to work for it. I'm just going to get it.
Yeah.
I'm worthless. It doesn't matter anyway. So all of these habits again, or I'm going to blow up every relationship I have, no matter how well I'm treated. I'm going to blow it up. I'm going to be difficult to work with. All of those little things that we don't think about have a result of a trauma that hasn't been properly resolved.
Dealt with.
And yet, if we can acknowledge that, okay, that happened, it wasn't my fault, we can release that desire for control.
Well, I think that was what you've been through, and I know when we had our many long conversations about it, the fact that you were coming out and talking about it, I think I found it quite inspirational that someone like yourself, that for people looking on from externally would say a successful, happy person, and you come out and talk about it. I think it's important.
Well, from the beginning, Gary, it was really important to me to acknowledge that if I felt I needed to stay hidden and secret, then the crime still had to be kept hidden and secret, and hence it was my fault. that I was to blame. This notion of victims' identity having to be sequestered suggests that it's something dirty that they did that they need to run away from, that no one in their life can know about. And from the very beginning, I had to go, that was not my fault. I didn't do any of that. I was 5. I was 4.
Yeah.
I didn't do any of that. So I felt it felt very important to me that I had a platform. People could look at my life and some aspects of it aspire to be like me. But I had that thing that had happened to me.
Yeah.
I needed people to know that happened to me. And I'm not ashamed of it. And if I can say it, when I've got so much to lose, in that people on the street know who I am. I can't put a balaclava on and hide.
Yeah.
People know who I am, and I will naturally be associated with that. Now, I'm not saying I want to be the poster girl for trauma. What I'm saying is I was traumatised.
Yeah.
It led to certain habits in my life. It led to certain outcomes that weren't necessarily desirable, but I was able to take the power back. And a big part of that was having the strength to work with the police to get an outcome, rather than sitting back or running away or saying, I don't want to be a part of this, saying, yeah, I want to be a vital part of this. If I'm going to reclaim my history, it's going to be on my terms. And that means I'm going to be a player in this. And everyone out there has the power to do it. And I'm not saying that needs to be everyone's choice. People will deal with it how they best deal with it.
Yeah.
But don't for a moment feel that you have to hide from it. Don't for a moment feel that you have to hide it from other people.
Yeah.
It doesn't make you less capable. It doesn't make you less desirable. It doesn't make you less worthy of love. It makes you a person who something horrible happened to when they're a child.
Yep.
And they're now an adult. And that adult, there was no one there to protect that child. Well, you're here to protect yourself. And I said that in the victim impact statement, that in a perfect world, someone would have saved me. Someone would have stopped you, or you would have had the wherewithal as an adult to acknowledge that what you were doing was wrong. But you didn't, and there was no one there to protect me. Well, I'm here to protect me now. I'm here to protect that little girl, and I'm going to stand up for her rights, and I'm going to get justice for her and everyone else like her. And I don't need sympathy for that. I don't need empathy. I don't need to be rewarded. All I need to know is my legacy was putting him behind bars, and it means he can't do it to another child. And there's a lot of children out there who won't grow up with the baggage that I've had.
And I think it sends out a message too, that people that have committed those offences, you don't know when or if someone's going to come knocking on your door. So they don't think they've got away with it, because you never know when justice is going to come calling.
And that's the critical factor deterrent. We talked about that a lot in Predatory.
Yeah.
That just hoping it won't happen or relying on luck to protect kids isn't enough. And the notion of repatriation for victims is putting the chicken before the egg. That's saying someone's life has to be absolutely blown up and destroyed before we can do anything about it.
Yeah.
We need to deter them, and we need to prevent it. And the way to do that is talk about it more often and send the message out there. If you're thinking about doing this, you can expect 15 years in jail. Yeah, you can expect someone to rock up on your doorstep.
I would love someone that's committed those offences listening to this podcast, and I want them to be sweating. I want them to be feeling, oh no, it's coming.
And think about it. Peter Vincent White, his name is going to be splashed everywhere pretty soon. Because I'm out and I'm going to talk about it loud and proud.
And that's his legacy.
That's his legacy, absolutely. That I don't wish him ill, Gary. I don't. Because he's the one who has to wake up every morning and look in the mirror and see Peter Vincent White, whose legacy on this earth is not the lovable plumber or the, Rotary member or the loving husband, the loving father, the loving grandfather. It's the bastard who molested children.
Yeah.
That's his legacy. That is all he will be remembered for.
Yep, nothing more.
Yeah.
That's good. That's sweet. Your acting career. Now
back to more savoury topics.
Yeah. Your acting career. Now you hear this the typical type actor that unemployed, aspiring actor. But acting has been quite good to you.
Oh,
you have been everywhere.
I have. I've done some incredible roles. I've had some incredible opportunities.
You probably can't remember them. I'm just going to read out some of the shows. So, Neighbours, I think we all know Neighbours, Underbelly, Winners and Losers, Satisfaction, House Husbands, Fat Tony and Co., The Wrong Girl, Stingers, City Homicide, Rescue Special Ops. It's a pretty impressive CV, isn't it, for an actress in TV? I think I've been on
about 60 different TV shows and a bunch of films thrown in there, and stage productions. I started as a stage actor.
And movies. You've been doing movies.
Yeah.
What's it like being an actor? Like, from the time I would imagine you're on Neighbours, you couldn't walk the street without people knowing who you were. because that was such a popular show. Everyone watched Neighbours. Even if you didn't watch it, you'd see it on the ads. You knew what was happening on Neighbours. Did that change your life when you? Because it's one thing acting on the stage and doing plays and that, but when you're on a TV show like that.
Absolutely, in a couple of different aspects. In some ways, here we go, harking back to the trauma, it was reassuring because it was Madeleine who was being recognised, not Melanie. Mm-hmm. And Madeleine didn't have any of Melanie's flaws or bruises or damage. She was this whole new person.
Yeah.
Well, a pretty fragile shell of a person in retrospect. But it was daunting and kind of confusing because you are recognised for the role you're playing, not necessarily the person you are.
Yeah.
So I remember once, funnily enough, well, it's not funny, but breaking up with a boyfriend when I was very young, and we were doing it over a Chinese meal. It was a really lovely uncoupling, to quote, conscious uncoupling before Gwyneth and Chris did it. And we were both in tears, and this woman had come up to me and said, "Oh, can't have a photo." And I've said, yeah, I'm just in the middle of something. Tears streaming down my face, makeup everywhere. And she's like, "Oh, but my car park's about to expire. Can I do it now?"
Yeah.
And my then on the verge of being ex-partner had blown up and just said, "Can you see that we're having this moment?" And she's like, she's not looked at him, looked at me and gone, "Knew you'd be like that," and then stormed off. It's like, whoa.
Yeah.
And the times where people would come up and go, "Oh, what's it? Oh, D. Hey, hi, I'm a big fan." I go, "Hi, oh, my name's actually Madeleine." Go, yeah. So, D, what's it like to pash toady? You know, that kind of... the public facade is very much a facade, and we can see that that's what the industry creates. It's smoke and mirrors. But that side of being an actor, I've never really enjoyed. I've not enjoyed being the fame side of it wasn't what I was there for. For me, it was the acting. It was the juice of the character, creating a character, breathing life into this new being, and walking their walk and talking their talk, and feeling how they respond to things in a counterintuitive way to how I would respond to things. And I really felt it was a privilege to tell people's stories. I've always regarded myself as a storyteller.
Yeah.
So to be able to, I think that everyone has a story that deserves to be told, and I've never been a judge of the kind of characters I've played, because I've thought, it's not me sitting in judgment on this person. I'm going to tell this person's story, whether they're a bank robber or a whore or a checkout chick, with as much grace and dignity and honour as I can, because this is their story. The way they see the world is through their eyes, informed by their personal experience. And I really feel honoured that I have had the opportunity to allow audiences to walk in someone else's shoes for a moment, to see the world through someone else's eyes, whether it's for an hour sitting on the couch in front of the TV or on the big screen or on a stage production. That, for me, has always been an honour, and for me that is at the very heart of why I act. Yeah,
and look, I don't know a lot of actors. I've got two good friends, Rob Carlton and Matt Nable, and I know when they talk about acting, they've got that passion for it. Great storytellers telling a story or telling a story through someone else's eyes and all that. And I do find it fascinating, and there is a real skill to it that
It depends who you ask, Gary. So
well, it depends what actor you are. You must have something.
And what show you're on.
You must have something going for you, like with all those shows. So it wasn't sort of knocking at the door of the unemployed actor that was,
Oh, yes, but everyone says that. But I've been working on stage since I was a child.
Yeah.
So it was that one... I just started law school when I did the audition for Neighbours, got the role. It was initially a 2-week stint, which became 11 weeks, which became et cetera, rolled on, and hence created a whole lot of other opportunities. I had a repertoire of acting behind me that no one will ever see. Yeah. So it certainly wasn't one of those overnight sensations.
Overnight success. You've been doing it for a long time.
Yeah.
So all the shows that you worked on, different shows, I would imagine they all create different experiences for you.
Oh, absolutely. And it's funny how I can now see, in retrospect, that a lot of the characters that I gravitated towards reflected some critical component of my life.
Yes.
And I won't be backwards in coming forwards. There was a period there where I think I was Australian television's go-to girl for sex scenes. Yeah. Not that you know anything about that, Gary.
Not that
Don't
I watch
go
any
home
of
and
those.
Google it.
No.
I can't help but wonder if part of that was where I'd come from. That it was almost the ease with which I slipped into those roles,
Yeah.
the ease with which I've carried out those functions as someone who knew what it was like to be violated or be intimate with someone who should never be intimate with.
Right.
So that weird, it's always awkward and a bit uncomfortable when you're working with another actor and you have to create intimacy on screen.
Yeah.
And I found that very easy. And I like to think that it's because I was accomplished as an actor. I was able to do that and transcend my own fears. But I can't help but wonder in retrospect if a big part of that came from my history.
Yeah. Well, I was reading that you thought you might have found acting because you could be in someone else's skin.
Yeah.
That
to escape me. Escape me. And everything. That's why the stage felt like my safe place, because it was a place where I could put on
you're
a
not
mask.
You're not judging me. You're judging the character
No,
I'm playing.
absolutely. It's a projection.
Yeah.
I'm just a canvas.
Yeah.
Project on me what you will, which to some degree is what a lot of victims feel, that someone's inappropriate desires have been projected on them when they were just a blank canvas.
Right.
And that often carries out for the rest of their life. They will let them... Statistically, victims of child abuse are 7 times more likely to get raped.
Yeah.
They're 4 times more likely to suffer a drug or serious substance abuse addiction, something like 20 times more likely to be addicted to alcohol, to have a crutch, so to speak. They gravitate towards crime in exponential numbers. They're exponentially more at risk of suffering anxiety, depression and mental ill health.
Yeah.
So that in itself demonstrates that for anyone who has experienced sexual abuse, they are vulnerable to being very easily led astray, very easily influenced. And that's because at a time when they were figuring out who they were, and that was me, at a time in those formative years in your childhood when you're learning what the world is, what it looks like, your place in it, you've been taught that you're worthless, that all you can expect is pain, and all you deserve is abuse. So you walk into the world expecting that everywhere. And the only way to survive is to be like a dog that doesn't want to get hurt, rolls onto its back so you can rub its belly. You just become a canvas that people can project whatever they want on, but the canvas itself is rotten. And that desire to self-destruct.
Well, it must have been, there must have been times when you really could have lost your way. When you had the, let's call it fame, and that's not what you were acting for, but you had that recognition, the success, the identity there. You've got your inner demons that you've shut down. There was potential for you to go right off the rails, wasn't there?
Absolutely. And I think and in many ways I did. I mentioned before, I had horrific eating disorders that nearly killed me.
Yeah.
And would often run away from things that were good for me.
Yeah.
I only reflected on this when I was pulling together the victim impact statement, that when I was 5 or 6, I developed horrific OCD, and I would floss my teeth until they bled, and I would brush my gut teeth.
Yeah.
Until my gums were bleeding. I would wash my hands. Like, I had really severe eczema from me washing my hands compulsively. My skin was cracked and bleeding.
Yeah.
And it was me having a desire to be clean, anything to be clean, or anything to feel. So I never cut myself or anything, but I would floss my teeth until my gums were bleeding, just to feel something. Because all I did was I constantly stepping out of my body, constantly splitting or splintering.
Yeah.
So I know now that so many habits in my life were just to keep everything down. So I will not for a moment say that healing is easy, because when you knock that scab off and you let the memories come out full force and you start navigating through that dark territory, it's the emergency phase, like when we first started to talk about this, where it's all you can see, it's all you can think, it's all you can eat, it's all you can touch. Every sense is assaulted by what happened to you. And until you're able to return to that time and look it in the eyes and embrace that helpless child you were, instead of judging them and blaming them and being ashamed of them, you can't heal. Yeah. So those unhealthy habits are going to continue to play out. And you might not even know you're doing it. There's a whole population of percentage of society who don't have specific memories, but they have all of the red flags for abuse. Yeah. And at some point it's going to come out. Yeah. So that willingness to go back, to embrace that child, to address it, is the only way you're going to heal. And healing in itself, it sounds so woo-woo. I hate using that term. It's like wellness. It's a bloody hashtag in this day and age. Well,
you do spend some time up at Byron.
I do spend a lot of time with my crystals and my dream catchers. But immersing yourself into that healing hurts more than anything else in your life. And I think that is the first block that a lot of people who've experienced trauma come up with. It hurts so bad and it's so uncomfortable that they'll retreat. But you have to be willing to go through it, because I can tell you there is light on the other side. Yeah,
well, you've come through it. You've also suffered other trauma. Like, can we talk about the bus incident? Like,
I swear, Gary, in retrospect, it's like I asked for it.
Like, talk about being run over by the bus.
Yeah, quite literally hit by a bus. I used to love that saying, like, could be worse, could be hit by a bus. It's like,
hand up, I got hit by a bus. I'm glad you're smiling. I wasn't sure if we could go down this subject. But talk about that. You told me about it once, and it was quite a horrific accident.
I always wanted to be the kind of girl who stops traffic, Gary, just preferably not with my face. Yeah. So when I was working on Neighbours, I was 21. I'd come up to Sydney to host a kids' helpline charity and got up late. Typical, like most soap actors, I lived on a diet of jelly beans and black coffee throughout the day because I was a vegan back then, a very ill-informed vegan. So I've gotten up here, I haven't eaten anything. It's 9 o'clock at night, get to my hotel on Oxford Street, and they say, the restaurant's closed, but there's some shops on the other side of the road. I've gone across the road, found an IGA, came out, and I remembered that, because I'd never been to that part of Sydney before, I remembered that the crossing the traffic lights to my hotel corresponded with a bus stop. So I was standing next to the bus stop on the pavement, not on the road, on the pavement. Yeah. And a bus at speed pulled into the bus stop and mounted the pavement and collected me on the right side and threw me a couple of feet. Then I landed on my face on that same side and skidded a couple of feet, leaving all the skin from my face behind. Sorry, I've just leaned off the microphone then, leaving all the skin from my face behind. So I was actually found I was out comatose. Yeah. I was found by 2 sex workers on Oxford Street, and they actually held me and stopped the bleeding and called the ambulance. So for me, my work on Satisfaction, in which I played a sex worker, was my little tribute to them. Because they never came forward. I put out a public plea, please come forward so I can thank you. They never did. So I fractured my skull in 3 places, lost all the skin from my face, had a cerebral hemorrhaging, cerebral hematoma, lost my immediate short-term memory, and I actually ruptured. The breaks in the fractures in my skull, one all from the orbital lobe around my eye, which is where I was hit by the bus. One ran over the top of my head, one to the back, and one under my brain shelf. And that opened, and I was leaking brain fluid into my throat. Yeah. It tastes like, I don't know if you remember this when you were a kid, anyone out there listening, Kit Kats used to be wrapped in aluminium foil. Do you remember that? Yeah. And sometimes you'd chew on the aluminium foil after you ate it, and it would give you this kind of, that's what brain fluid tastes like.
Jesus, I never thought we'd get that type of information.
It's all about details. Yeah. Come on, you're a police officer, Gary. It's all about details. So tell me, how did your brain fluid taste?
People have eaten other people, but they never actually said how it tastes.
That was obviously the next step. I haven't done that yet. Cannibalism. Something to aim for. Put that on the bucket list.
But like, how old were you? 21.
Yep.
And you're an actor on a high-profile show.
And at first, I was a Jane Doe, because while I was laying in the gutter, someone stole my wallet. It was on Oxford Street, Gary.
You got to love Sydney.
I was like, Sydney. Welcome to Sydney.
You're a kind
So my
city.
agent had gotten a call from the kids' helpline, people saying, Madeleine didn't come to the dress rehearsal. Where is she? Yeah. And he's called around, and Neighbours said, no, she got on the plane. So he's called around all of the police stations and the hospitals, and St Vincent's said, yeah, we've got a Jane Doe by that description.
Right.
And thank God he came in, because I had a crush injury, which is where all the skin dies on impact, and needed significant surgery and a skin graft and things like that, and they were just going to sew me up And he said, she's an actor. No.
Yeah.
So they were a little bit more conscientious. I've still got one half of my eyebrow on the left side will never grow back, and the skin's a bit tighter. It's like I've got free Botox, but just in one part of my face.
Don't encourage people to throw themselves under a bus.
No, I won't for that.
Yeah.
Cheap cosmetic surgery.
Yeah.
And chuck yourself under a bus.
Well, that was fortunate, wasn't it? Like that could have.
But I still lost. So
Yeah.
when I woke, and because I came out of this sort of deep coma with severe amnesia, had no idea who I was. And when I was finally cognizant and slipped into the bathroom, because the doctors wouldn't let me look at myself, I did not recognise who I was because my face was swollen up to twice its normal size, completely black and blue, lost all the skin down here, both my eyes, all the vessels had burst, so I had these two RoboCop bright red eyes, broke a bunch of my teeth. I'm going to be honest with you, Gary. I'd been working in a high-profile television show where my character was pretty much defined by having blonde hair down to her bum and big boobs and a little waist who'd rock up in a bikini for no justifiable reason. So hence I, in that moment, thought that my career was over, despite the fact I'd been acting since I was a child, despite the fact that my go-to was Shakespeare and I could quote a Shakespearean monologue off the top of my head, despite the fact that I was a proper schooled method actor, I thought, that's it. If my face is done, my career's down the toilet. And in my deepest, darkest moments, in the only time in my entire life I've thought, I'm just going to end this. I can't. I've worked so hard to get here. And if this is going to be snatched away from me, I just want it over. And I had to have a real dark night of the soul because I, in that moment, confused my appearance with my ability. Yeah. I confused the way I looked with what I was worth. And I'm going to say, Gary, it was a gift. At 21 years old, working in the film and entertainment industry, to be confronted with what the relevance of one's appearance is was a gift because it forced me to acknowledge and ask myself, why was I an actor? Was it so I could, as I said earlier, take people on a journey, let them walk in someone else's shoes, tell their story, or was it so I could be on the cover of Dolly magazine, which I know no longer exists, but was really hot back then.
You've made it when you're on the cover of Dolly magazine.
And it was clearly the former. And so if that was my onus, then I could be a director. I could be a writer. I could be a grip or a cameraman. Yeah. I could do any of those things. That if the way I looked was going to determine what I could do, and I was willing to sacrifice my life and everything I had worked for to be on the front of Dolly magazine.
So that was an internal wake-up call for yourself.
That was a massive wake-up call. And I left Neighbours soon after, and I loved working on Neighbours, but I had to admit that as a method actor, I was getting lazy. I wasn't striving to create that world, that character's world anymore. I was letting my own wants and needs bleed into it. And that set me on a journey to really focus on what storytelling meant. And so I deliberately gravitated to roles like Underbelly, like Satisfaction, which were meaty and dark and forced me to empathise with people who I thought were heinous.
Yeah, yeah.
To see through them and go, well, okay, so she's a pimp with a pill press and she's prostituting herself on the side, but she's also a mum who needs to put food on the table. So it doesn't mean I'm condoning those actions. It just means I'm striving to understand them.
No, I think it's an informed way of looking at people, and I like to think that I'm progressing in the way that, just because someone's done a bad thing or doing bad things doesn't make them a bad person. That you've got to look at them in the totality.
And that's something that has been really helpful in my own healing. That I really take a lot of time to meditate on the fact that I was a little baby, and to see that little baby that we all were originally, and say, does that little baby deserve what happened to her when she was 5? Of course not. Does that little 5-year-old deserve to continue to play out that trauma and get smacked in the face by what happened to her then for the rest of her life? Of course not. So why are you judging yourself so harshly? Yeah. Every bad guy out there was someone's little baby. And
be kinder to yourself.
Be kinder to yourself and be kinder to others.
Yeah.
Who knows? We might have a revolution. The world might for once be livable.
Simple philosophy, just hard to deliver.
Yeah, the practical philosophy 101.
Okay. Be kind to yourself and others. the turning point when you decided to report the matter to the police. What talk us through that? What was there a watershed moment?
Yeah, well, I can say it now that that my relationship with my former partner was we were struggling, and there was a lot of confrontation, which happens when relationships tether. And that I've always avoided confrontation in my life. Always avoided it, hated it, would go straight into disassociative, the dorsal vagal response, where you kind of go to sleep or you just vague out. Much to the frustration of people who were trying to hash out an issue with me, I just zone out, I'm gone, see, I'm checking out. Now, that was still happening to me, but in that state, I was starting to have memories. Now, as I said earlier, I've always acknowledged that there'd been some abuse, but I really did think it was pretty superficial.
Yeah.
These memories were really bad, really dark, and I was just getting the shape of them and the feeling of them. I was feeling that fear, and I was remembering the pain, and I was remembering little events around it that were really quite dark and twisted. And it was coming more and more often to the point that it was getting distracting.
And this is just in quiet moments. You're
quiet
sitting
moments.
there and we all
the littlest
drift the
thing.
mind and something comes in.
Or if my child was crying, I'd either disassociate or I'd feel something or have a memory that was... It was too... I've said to you before, the white noise around what had happened to me was becoming so loud that I couldn't function anymore. I was really struggling to function. Just day-to-day living was becoming too much. And so I decided to report it. I did a bit of research, reached out to a socket branch in Melbourne, had a conversation with two detectives who, uniformed police doing a great job, but perhaps didn't have a deep understanding of trauma and how it impacts so many parts of your life. And I found that being asked really pointed questions over the phone, highly triggering. I struggled with it. I got down as much as I could remember and then shut it all down and just let it go. And it was only Scott, my incredible detective.
And we can give him a shout out. We're allowed
Scott
to talk about. I met him down in Melbourne, and I'm pretty harsh on what I consider good detectives or good operators. And he certainly, in the short time and short conversation I had with him, had 100% respect for him.
Yeah, and I think that and
seems
you
like
would
a real
this.
detective.
He's taken the time, aside from the procedural aspect of policing, to understand what trauma is, what it looks like, how it manifests, to be able to identify triggers and go, okay, we're going too hard, let's go over here, and how to carry a conversation so that the person you're speaking to isn't sitting in shame. And as soon as you address someone with pity, they feel ashamed. If you address them as, you're going to be really useful in this, that your experience is going to be pivotal and you are strong enough at this point in your life to claim justice, to reclaim your history. If someone comes at you with that, you're
how
like,
powerful is that?
Whoa,
to
I
you
mean,
in your
absolutely.
situation?
That he did not demonstrate any pity for me. He was like, you got an opportunity here. This is an opportunity. And he doesn't force anyone's hand.
Yeah.
And he worked with all of us over a number of years with extreme patience and tolerance, hours and hours of sitting to these people who, as soon as we touched on the topic, would become a puddle. Yeah. And building us back and putting us back together. And every one of the victims, in my case, and I now know quite a few other of Scott's clients, I'll call them, who will say the same thing, that had it not been for him, or they might have reported it initially and dealt with someone who said, well, what was their name and where did it happen, what did they do to you? Which sends you, whoa, I'm triggered, I'm out of here. This is something I've been carrying for 30 years that my entire family and everyone in my environment told me I should just forget about. Yeah. And you wanted me to dive in, I don't even know who you are, and I'm on the phone to you. Whereas Scott's approach was, so he'd found in investigating complaint from another victim and in investigating her case, dug deep and found my report. And no one had linked the two together. Yeah. And his approach with me was not, I need these facts over the phone. It was, look, I'm looking into a complaint regarding the same person that you've reported. Do you reckon we could just meet and have a chat? And he came to me in Byron.
Taking the time.
Yep, went to the trouble of getting. Now we all know the nice holiday in Byron's great if you can get it, but it wasn't a holiday for Scott. He came up there and sat with me for days as I waxed and waned about digging that little bit deeper, and he demonstrated to me that I was in a rare position to change the trajectory for a lot of people's lives. Because these cases, when it's just one complainant, are almost impossible to get up. When there is a team, very different story.
It becomes overwhelming.
Yeah. And he made it possible for me to begin the lengthy process of putting this person in prison. Now, there was never any promise. There was never any guarantee that it would work, but it did. And it's because of him.
And so much can make a difference. When you're so vulnerable, if you went and approached the wrong person or the wrong person came in with the attitude, I'm talking wrong, I'm talking the detective, like disinterested or not demonstrating empathy or care or passion for the work that they're doing, that can turn you off. And
absolutely. And if you think from the case of, say, like a 50-year-old man who might be coming in to report a crime that happened 45 years ago. Now, if a young uniformed constable, who is not a psychologist, and nor should they have to be a psychologist, is that first point of contact, they're going to treat it as procedurally, which is, okay, time, date, what's your age, when did this happen? 45 years ago, what? What did he do? For this person who it's taken them 45 years to stand in this moment at this police desk, they're going to run for the hills and never talk about it again.
Yeah.
So I think so much of the issue can be combated with proper education, knowing that there are specialist police that work in this area who are trauma-informed, who will help you feel that you can disclose without the pressure of, okay, you're going to have to prosecute, we're going to make you do this. None of it's mandatory. Just to have that opportunity to say the words.
Yeah.
To let someone know that this happened to you and this person did it, even if that's the end of the story. And for me, having Scott holding my hand through this journey is what propelled me to go, okay, I'm not just going to report it. I'm not just going to give you the details. Yeah. I'm going to make sure this bastard can't do it ever again. And that's what we did.
Yeah, well, most definitely, it's what you did. We might take a break, and when we get back, we'll talk about the actual offences, the court matter, and everything.
So you're not going to ask me what it's like to pash toady?
Well,
I feel really disappointed.
Okay, no, I've got a couple of other questions from the underbelly and a few other things, or Fat Tony. We'll delve into that. If I've always wanted to know what it's like at the Logies Award night and the backstory.
Haven't you been to the Logies? What are you doing here, people? Gary Jubelin hasn't been to the Logies?
What's the backstory there?
The backstory is it can be very, very dangerous if you're a young actor because you're tied into it. Like you spend weeks. It's all about the frock.
Oh, the frock.
So you're tied into a corset that's so tight you can't eat, but you're being drip-fed champagne. Yeah. If you make it out of there alive, I swear, I've got to confess, I would generally go for the ceremony and leave straight away. I've never actually been to one of the after parties. Danger Will Robinson. That for me was just flashing red lights.
No, the after parties, that's who did what, really?
Well, exactly. I didn't get to see it. Look, in my scenario, I'm such a klutz anyway, invariably would have to get cut out of my dresses. And the last Logies I attended, well, the one before last, I didn't know that I was actually pregnant with my first child.
Right.
And I was sewn into this beautiful dress. And halfway through the night, I was presenting an award, and halfway through the night, I went, I've really got to pee. And discovered, because it was like this mermaid design dress, that I couldn't lift my dress above my knees.
That wasn't thought of when you got into it?
No, because I didn't know I was pregnant. I didn't know I'd need to pee with such desperation. And so I was perching on the toilet, trying to have a pee, and in the end I went, that's it. I'm out of here. And I just left. Got home, got my partner to cut my dress off, end of the story. So that's been my Logie experience.
Okay, all right.
Chicken rather than the beef, I'd always say. Just chicken rather than the beef.
No, I'm sure there's some interesting stories there. We might delve a little bit deeper in part 2. But
I think we start a petition, let's get Gary Jubelin to the Logies, 2024.
I get myself into enough trouble. When we get back, we'll talk about the process, and I felt like I was with you on the journey when I was hearing you talk about the pressure up with the court matter coming up, and when you were helping out with the investigations and all that. And I know what you've been through, and it really gladdens my heart to see you sit here, and you just seem lighter from what it was. It was always this dark cloud hanging over your head. But we're going to delve into that. I'll apologise up front that we're probably going to dig up stuff that, painful memories for you. But I think it's important that people talk about it and show that you can come through this.
Don't need to excavate it anymore. That's something that happened to me then.
Yeah.
It's not how I'm living my life now.
Cool. Okay, we'll be back for part 2 shortly.